bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee. David Tulis.
I hope the Christian church can help groups such as Concerned Citizens for Justice, which have doctrinaire, liberal, progressive ideas, come with solutions to the table of ideas. Now, this group, which is about 30 years old, it began with the death of Wadey Suttles in police custody. For a long time in the newsroom at the Times Free Press, where I was an editor, there was a kind of a joke on who killed Wadey Suttles, and it was just thrown around as a kind of a bit of a hoot. And especially when someone out in town bore a bumper sticker that said "I killed Wadey Suttles," and so here we have a group that was formed with the purpose of opposing mass criminalization, incarceration, gentrification, and displacement. According to its website, we live in a society structured by white supremacy and exploitation under capitalism, and our communities, which are mostly made up of black, working class, and other oppressed folks, are often in crisis and defending themselves. That is the group represented. And now there are many things that are right and true about the grievance of this group, and I don't mean to make slight of the death of Wadey Suttles or Javario Eagle, or in East Ridge, Todd Browning, the plumber, executed by a police officer. A city employee executed a plumber who was in a fit. He was having a fit. He was not acting rationally. He was making threats. He had threatened people in an auto parts store in East Ridge before having a confrontation with Officer Stevenson in his front yard, and lost his life in a statutorily permitted extrajudicial summary execution by a city employee. That is an amazing thing to think that city employees can do that under any civilized rule of law. But it's possible. It's in the law. It is in the law. And Jim Hammond assured me that it was legal. And D.A. Pinkston had nothing to say except to say, well, this met the statutory requirements of a lawful execution, a lawful killing of a man who had done nothing worthy of capital punishment, but who lost his life anyway. The left has these problems are true problems to be perceived. Okay, we understand that, and in fact, Franklin McCauley was asking some black friends of his in the past week had they heard about the Hanson Melvin case that only we have. Other stations and other platforms had the firing of the officer David Campbell when that happened, but our platform covered that case extensively, probably with 20 stories and multiple interviews with this police victim, and so one can't say, even though we have a right-wing presence in Chattanooga with Sean Hannity and Alex Jones, here I am, the classical liberal. So it's hard to say that we're right-wing when you have David Tulis on the air, the classical liberal, right? That's what I am, a classical liberal. And so I'm able to see people on the left and see the good things that they have to say and empathize with the cause, even though I think the problem with Concerned Citizens for Justice is that it and people in that realm of thinking don't have the solution. The Christian church has the solution, but there we have another problem, and that is that people in the churches on the Lord's Day yesterday are never given any explanation on what the answers are. They're never told what the answers are to oppression. There's no answer, right? There's no analysis of any kind given in I don't think any single Christian church in Chattanooga of where the solution is to bringing back local control, local government, an end of corporate government, right? And that would be in the area of policing, the restoration of the sheriff, Jim Hammond in our case, to his lawful place, and a removal from municipal corporate government of the police power. And there are reasons to think that this is a mistake legally, even though there's a whole industry that feeds off of that corporate connection. The law industry, the judicial industry, and many other people who are sort of support staff for policing, which is by two court opinions, Chattanooga versus Myers and Chattanooga versus Davis, that suggest that there is no authority at all legally. There just has to be a proper challenge made, and that challenge is being made in kind of fits and starts by one Basil Marceau, who is a a perennial candidate, a man who's not a very good writer, though he has, I think he's in the grip of a reading of these two opinions that he can't shake off. He just can't shake off the reading of these opinions. So what is the positive solution? It's not being offered by Concerned Citizens for Justice and the progressive left. Mostly what they do is complain. And there's a default position. We need another program, right? We need more laws. We need to have more federal laws. These are always the answer. If the state's not going to do something to stop oppression by blacks in Chattanooga, we need to have a federal law, right? We need to have a Justice Department investigation. Well, maybe, but I'd say that the solution needs to come from the very smart people in Chattanooga. And that is just like Joanne Favors, the state representative, says, we have smart people in Chattanooga. We have good people in Chattanooga. Cannot we solve the problem of the bottom rung 5 schools in the state's I-zone program, where all the bad schools are lumped? And of course, if you have a monopoly like that, you're always going to have 5 bottom schools. In a marketplace scenario, you don't have that situation. There is no 5 bottom schools. You just have competitors and more or less an equal chance of becoming better in competition with capital investment freed from the state's claims against it, so that capital can be invested in local enterprises that are in the schooling sector. So that's, Joanne Favors would say we need to have local solutions, and she's given me 2 interviews making that point. Bravo for her. Well, the story about the cemetery, I think, needs to figure a little bit on the causes of the war. And if you know the cause of the war and what we need to do about it, give me a call at 800-8949, 800-8949. You can interrupt me, okay? You can interrupt me. You, my listener, look, it's just you and me, okay? If you have, I know you're busy. If you've got time, just give me a call. But if you don't, that's also fine, and I can get to my stack, okay? I do have a stack, and I never get through it on any given day, and it just kind of frustrates me. I sometimes ask myself, should I hold things over for another day? Usually I don't. Usually I just move on and say, I'm going to start the new day at 3:45 a.m. every morning when I get up. That dinging of the clock, that little chime, it gets me up. I start fresh. Now, the war was fought over the Morrill Tariff. The Morrill Tariff, or Morrill Tariff, was named after Justin S. Morrill, a congressman. And the war was not fought over slavery. It was fought over taxes. It was a tax war. And the Morrill Tariff was a Yankee industrialist tax against the South, in short. And that's why tensions were so high. The racial issues were, prior to the war getting going, they did not really exist. The question, even for Lincoln, who did not like blacks and who favored exporting blacks into colonies in Africa, such as Liberia, the war was not about slavery, but it became, the idea of slavery became the cause of the war as part of the marketing of that great conflict by Washington to Europeans and others. The Morrill Tariff was really started the whole thing. Though years before that tariff, there were others that were making sectional hostilities very intense, and that was the worst part of the tariff program was well before the war in the 1820s, when the tariff was at 51%. In other words, you have cotton, and if it's going out of the country, it has to pay a 50% tax on the value of that cotton. So if it's worth $100, you have to pay $50 a tax to the good people as an export tax. And things coming in were also taxed as well. So if you were a Southerner, you had to buy Yankee shovels and Yankee equipment, because they were all those things, when they were imported, were taxed with a 50% level, and that was devastating to the Southern states. In fact, in the 1820s, there was a tax of, in 1824, Henry Clay got the Congress to pass a tax of 35%. And that hit South Carolina so hard that over the course of 2 years, it lost 25% of its exports. And in 1828, the greedy North raised it again to 50%, and that was called at the time a tariff of abomination. And then you had what Mike Scruggs tells about as the nullification crisis by South Carolina in 1832. So 4 years after that, there was a crisis that could have ended. It could have led to a war even then. But the North agreed to a compromise that was brought about by John C. Calhoun, who was a senator, and he in 1833 had a compromise that brought the tariff back to a normal level of about 15%. 15% is doable. That's not going to offend anybody too much, and it remained at that level till about 1860. But the Whigs, of course, the party of Lincoln, the Whigs that became the Republicans, that was Lincoln's party, and that was the party of the tariff. It had two main goals, and one of them was to prevent the extension of slavery into new states that were coming in. And then the other goal, the main goal, was according to Thaddeus Stevens, who was the firebrand abolitionist, Iron Man. He was an iron industrialist in the North. What he saw and wanted was the tariff. We need to get that tariff higher to protect us. We have to be protected. And the idea of protecting his own business and his own industry was just part of his goal. He did not like the South, and so he said to one audience in New York that the tariff would enrich the northeastern states, and that it would impoverish the southern states. It would impoverish the western states as well. But it had to be done if we are going to become a great nation, and we're going to have industrial people who are prospering. The workers in our states, our Pennsylvanias and other states, and our companies. He would become, after Lincoln was assassinated, he would become like the boss of America. And he at one point said that the leaders of the South should be rounded up and hanged. In 1860, just a couple of days before Lincoln was elected, a newspaper in South Carolina said the real causes of dissatisfaction in the South with the North are in the unjust taxation and expenditure of the taxes by the government of the United States, and in the revolution the North has effected in this government and here's the second main cause of the war: the shift from a confederated republic to a national sectional despotism. In other words, it was centralized, it was becoming unitary. In other words, a one government system, as opposed to a weaker central government with the owners of the government being the states. That system was being weakened, and you had a national sectional tyranny. That is what happened, and the war was fought to end the suffocation of the South in large measure. And there are, that slavery is not the main cause of that war. It's just not the main cause. The main cause was the tariff, and that it was wanted. As I say, it was wanted to maintain the industrial North. The South was going to pay for that industrialization. The money that was collected, most of it was paid by the South, and most of it went to the North. So you had a subsidy of Southern farm families, Southern farm culture, the plantation culture, the small farm culture, subsidizing the North. And then the second point that I mentioned is the idea of unitary government. The fact that you had not states' authority and individual states recognized in their authority and respected, but you had centralization where effectively there is a single power, not a broken government, a divided government where there are competing interests, but a unitary government. And in our day, we think we have divided government with a Congress, a judicial branch, and the executive branch, but we don't. We have today an extraordinary centralized form, and it's not the high court that's the real danger. It's Washington executive branch. We have monarchical administrative government with the president at the head. Okay, we don't have divided government anymore. We haven't really had that since the First World War under President Wilson. Charles Dickens, who was writing in 1861 in a London weekly, he was a very strong opponent of slavery, and he looked across the Atlantic and he said, "The northern onslaught upon slavery is no more than a piece of specious humbug disguised to conceal its desire for economic control of the United States." And Karl Marx, we might dispute him in his economic analysis, but he said the following about about the war in The Economist. He said, the war between the North and South is a tariff war. The war is further not for any principle, does not touch the question of slavery, and in fact turns on the Northern lust for power. So this slavery was not a cause of the war, and yet that is the only issue which we consider, right? When we consider the Chattanooga Cemetery and the city's being a trustee of it, in other words, a protector, a kind of overseer of that property, we think that, well, that just can't be because of slavery. If you allow that to happen, Mayor Burke thinks, if you accept that, then you are endorsing slavery. Well, that's just, what do you think about that? What do you make of that? There was a huge response over the weekend at John Wilson's Chattanoogan.com. There were 17 or 18 letters sent there, or essays. Some were really just real nice essays that talked about that. The North wanted the South to be a colony. The South had disadvantages that the North was taking advantage of, and it did so by the tariff against the South. It was a war fought against taxation, and then against the idea of centralization. And also, I think you need to consider this: there was a religious element as well. The North was largely liberal in its Christianity. It was Unitarian. It was not Trinitarian as much anymore, and the Puritan ethic had been largely rejected. And the strength of Puritanism, of course, is its attention to detail. But that attention to detail was shifted into a kind of busybodiness of government. Government was seen, of course, as progressive. It had to be in everybody's business. It had, of course, great responsibility, right? The civil state had great responsibility, and so you have the nanny state, the nanny government of the progressives rising from the brokenness of Calvinism, which holds the two great doctrines of Calvinism and the Reformation, of course, are the sovereignty of God and irresistible grace. And the American Calvinists had forsaken already in the 1600s. They were forsaking the law of God as the basis for civilization, the basis for law. They had rejected that. They were becoming rationalists, thanks to John Locke and others in the English Enlightenment. And so they had, Christians, America, the Reformed camp in America, had forsaken the law of God, which is the law, the Ten Commandments. The law is the basis of social transformation. It is the basis of the kingdom, right? It is the basis of the country, the state. The Old Testament, where the law is given in detail, is the basis of culture, right? The New Testament focuses on individual salvation. The Old Testament, with all of its laws and statutes from Moses' hand, inspired by God, that is the basis of culture as a whole, right? Government as a whole, court systems, equity, contracts, business, personal relationships, the role of slavery in human relationships, finance, honest money, all those laws, the right to life, these are developed as governmental policy in the Old Testament. And so the North rejected the Southern Christianity as too Christian, right? It was too Christian, it was too obedient. It was just, we need to have a more open and more generous and more humanistic Christianity. And there were other causes of the war. One more that I just want to mention is the kind of abolitionism that we hear from Mr. Burke. Mr. Burke, Mayor Burke, is not an abolitionist, of course, because we don't have slaves anymore. Well, wait a minute. Well, hold on. We do have slavery. We have state-sanctioned slavery. The Department of Correction has 20,000 slaves today in its prison system. So we do have slavery today, sanctioned under the Tennessee Constitution for crimes committed, right? You are enslaved when you commit a crime, and the state becomes your master for the time of your sentence. You may be producing no value to your master at all, but it doesn't really matter. Some produce value for their master, others don't. The South had 5 times more the number of abolition societies than the North did during the time leading up to the war. And so there were many people of conscience in the South who did not like slavery, did not like it. Many of the intelligentsia in the South said we need to have gradual emancipation. And that has to be gradual, because otherwise you have gigantic economic disruptions. Think of what happened after the war. Suddenly, black people, without any preparation, were suddenly free, right? They could not function in freedom. They did not know what to do with freedom. And black people, because they've been trained by public schools, still don't really know how to deal with freedom. They are continually continuing demanding their rights to be fed and housed on the federal dime. And they don't know how to assert their rights against the police. They don't know how to defend themselves in court. They are the machine. They are the food, if you will, the oil that makes the industrial judicial complex go, right? They are the means of this system continuing, the judicial industrial complex in Hamilton County in Tennessee. Slavery was on its way out. General Lee did not like slavery. He did not fight for slavery. He fought for the authority of individual states to determine their own future. In other words, self-determination of states and the people in those states. That's why he fought. And it was a noble cause, and the fact that slavery was part of it doesn't diminish it, even though Mayor Burke thinks that it makes the whole thing heinous at every point. David Tulis, Nooganomics Radio.